Welcome to the Careers by Jenn podcast, episode 285. On this episode of the podcast, Jenn talks with her guest, Terry Iverson, about success without college. Oh, come on. That's just crazy. If people don't go to college, how will they get good enough jobs to be able to afford to pay back their student loans?
You're listening to the Careers by Jenn podcast. I'm your host, Jenn Swanson. This is the podcast that helps you to get the job, love your work, and advance your career. Careers by Jenn is a listener-sponsored podcast, and if you like the content, please consider supporting the show as a patron. You can do so for as little as $1 a month. Head over to CareersbyJenn.com and click on support to learn more. Hey, this is Jenn. Welcome to number 285 of this podcast. This podcast is recorded on the unceded and traditional territory of the Coast Salish people, including the Matsqui, the Kwantlen, the Katzie, the Semiahmoo, and the Stolo First Nations. And I am coming to you from the lower mainland of British Columbia, about 45 minutes east of Vancouver. And it is actually sunny today. It is a beautiful day. I am filming on Wednesday, January 20th, a monumental day for many of my listeners. And so it is a shiny day today. I am bringing you a guest podcast interview today, which I only do occasionally. I interviewed this guest way back in the fall of 2020. I'm happy to be bringing you this podcast episode finally. And I did talk about the topic of manufacturing very recently. In fact, it was published today, January 20th, on my YouTube channel at Careers by Jenn, where I talked about the 10 best jobs that I could think of. There are more, I'm sure, but the 10 best jobs for 2021 and beyond into the future. And I did mention the subject, the manufacturing topic of our conversation today, or at least something that this guest is passionate about. Terry Iverson is president and CEO of Iverson & Co., a machine tool distributor and rebuilder in Des Plaines, Illinois. He is also the founder of Champion Now, which is a not-for-profit organization that introduces young people to manufacturing careers by changing their perceptions, engaging them in internships, and inspiring them with videos and presentations. And Terry has written a book that came out recently called Finding America's Greatest Champion, and we talked about all sorts of topics, but I'm delighted to be sharing this conversation with you today. And if you have any comments, please head over to CareersbyJenn.com and leave those for us there. You can find us on social media, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn. I'm on there. I'm just trying to think of all the other places. And I would love for you to check out Terry Iverson's website as well at championnow.org, where you can find out all about him, all about his book, all about the organization, and hear him speak on video also. So I hope you enjoy my conversation with Terry Iverson. When did college and formal higher education become so desirable, and what are the consequences of that?
When did it become so desirable? Well, I think it's always been desirable going back to when I was a young person and when our parents were going through college. I think it's when did it become more irrelevant than when did it become desirable? I think it's always been desirable. But Jenn, I think in recent years, I think what's happened is that the market's changed. And so I think your listeners are probably are well advised to understand that facet, is that as the market changed, so needs the conditions change. So does the individual looking for the job need to change and be aware of what those changes are?
Yeah, it seems like it's the default, go to high school, finish high school, go to college or university. It seems to be the default, but there are so many more options out there.
Yeah, I think it's, I write a lot about parenting, and mentoring, and parents genuinely, they feel like they're doing the right thing, and they are doing the right thing. It's the safe thing to say, go to college, go to a 4-year university, get your degree. But unfortunately, too many people, parents, and also people that are in the workplace, they're uninformed as to other options that are available. It's not that they make a conscious decision always. It's that it's the only thing that they know.
Yeah, I was speaking with, we had some construction work done in our home a couple of years ago, a fairly big project to put in a basement suite for another person to live here. And our contractor was saying how difficult it was to find apprentices, and he was saying that we have a college that does trades, a trade school, and the trade classes have not even been able to fill because there weren't enough people to attend the trade classes because everybody was under, seems to be elsewhere. And they were desperate to have the people fill the trade classes. And the problem is it filters all the way down to the people that are trying to run businesses and have decent employees. It's very, very difficult, it seems, to find people who are willing to come in and take the training to do the work. But my impression of it is that it's such important work, and we're going to be in big trouble if we don't have skilled people to do the work.
Well, I think the flip side of that, or to add on to that, is that we already are in trouble. And what's really unfortunate is that we're in trouble from both sides of the equation. We're in trouble that we need skilled people in all different trades, and the fact that we have trouble filling those positions is a problem. Projects don't get done. Companies that are doing what they're doing don't grow. But then on the other side, on the flip side, you have people that can't afford college, or college isn't for them, or they don't learn that way, or they can afford college and they get a degree in something that's irrelevant, and they're competing against a cast of thousands. And so instead of being in demand with a degree, which they worked very hard and paid very dearly for in so many ways, there's a saturated market that they're trying to compete in. So it's coming from both sides, and that's why I think it's a win-win that your listeners understand that there's hope for those people that can't go to 4-year university, or can't afford it, or they have other skills and talents that they're much better at and enjoy more. So it's just a matter of connecting the dots and getting the word out.
And sometimes I wonder too if it is expectations that are set in the home, expectations that are set in the family. I know one young man who was in second year engineering, and he hated every minute of it. He did not want to go to school to be an engineer, but it was an expectation in the family because he came from a family of engineers, and you have to do this. And he wanted to play with cars. He wanted to, go become a mechanic and work on cars. That was his passion. That was his love. And he felt that he wasn't allowed to do that. He wasn't going to be supported in doing that. And so there he was in a highly competitive program, doing something he hated doing already when he was only in school for it. He hadn't even started the job yet.
And that's pretty much my college education and my experience, is that I was an AP student, good in math and science. My family has been in manufacturing for 90 years now. And so I went into mechanical engineering, but I really didn't want to. And I didn't really care for the process, the learning. It was too much theoretical. I really enjoyed the art of making things. And so many people, when they get into this path and they figure out it's not for them, I fell back into a manufacturing role where, I was able to use some of the concepts that I studied and learned for, going on 6 years, full-time and part-time. But I fell into a more hands-on role. into the manufacturing sector.
And that served you in a better way than had you stuck with it.
Absolutely, because back, when I was in school, this is my 40th year in the business, and back when I was in school, computers weren't really prevalent when I first got started. So mechanical engineering was basically defined as sitting at a drafting table or a drafting board. Well, when computers came on, then it was defined as sitting at a CAD station or a CAM station. And so computer-aided design, computer-aided manufacturing. And I wanted to be more hands-on and more engaged with the human element, with conversation with people. And mechanical engineering per se was not a good fit. So I made a much better decision, quitting, mechanical engineering school and going into something that I ultimately loved.
And so what brought you to that decision, Terry? Like, how did you, did it take a long time? How did you talk about that with your family? Like, what was the trajectory there, the process?
Well, at the time, it was my wife and I was sitting in a thermodynamics class. I can remember it quite well because we were already married, and I went to 3 years in night school. So it's about midnight at night in Milwaukee, Wisconsin at Marquette University. And I'm sitting there thinking, I don't like this anymore. I'm pretty much done. But I didn't feel it was really fair until I talked to my wife and got her read on if I ultimately quit college. And she said, well, why are you asking me? And I'm like, well, first of all, we're a team. Second of all, what you think and what you believe and what you feel is important to me. And if you want me to finish, I'll finish it. But I had the easy component because I was working full time and going to school, whereas she was, at home taking care of our young children. And to me, that was way harder. So I thought she had the final say.
And you had the support, which is great.
I did have the support. I've been very lucky for the 40 years that we've been married that she's been very supportive, and that's a very fortunate thing.
So what do you tell people that don't have that support, that are being told that, we'll pay for you to go to college, but we're not going to pay for you to go do X?
Well, I think you're differentiating between a marriage, my wife, and maybe either a significant other, maybe not married, or a parent.
I'm thinking about parents, actually,
Okay.
at this point.
All right. So when it comes to a parent, they think they know what's best, but they really don't know you. They know the old you, the previous you. They see you in many ways, and I'm a parent and a grandparent. So they see you as always being their child because you are their child. But they don't understand going forward what's going to make you happy and what literally is going to ignite you for the rest of your career. And so, and in addition to that, they may not be fully vested and knowledgeable about what the market is. And you, as someone that's going out into the workforce, you need to know what the market is. If you don't, then that's on you. But you can't fault your parents if they think they're doing the right thing. And in reality, for you, and with the changes in the marketplace, maybe it's not the right thing. That's still on you to convey that to them. And ultimately, if you can convince them, which you should be able to, then ultimately you have to stick with what you feel is right, knowing all those facets that they don't know.
So it's about communication and having a good conversation, and also about researching before you present your case.
Truly, it's always about communication in a job, in a marriage, in a family, with your children. It's always about communication, and that's very well said. But in terms of not knowing, there's no reason and there's no excuse for not knowing in today's world. You have the world at your fingertips, or at your keyboard or at your mouse click, and you can find out anything. But in my case, when I make a case for the trades and for manufacturing more specifically, once it's brought to your attention, okay, then it's on you to research. And if you don't do the research, then shame on you. But if you don't even know it even exists, or if it's even an option, then that's not necessarily your fault.
So what are the benefits and the advantages of working in manufacturing, if we're getting specific?
Well, some of the comment that I make about manufacturing is transferable to other trades. So let me say that. But there's a lot of different things. I mean, first of all, the learning process, let's start there. A lot of people don't learn the prototypical way. I was a very good student, but I hated learning that way. I hated reading. I hated being, taught in a conventional way and watching. I have a very short attention span, which eventually you'll figure out when you're done with this interview. And so consequently, that's one is how you learn. Two, what you're good at and what you enjoy. Well, sometimes you like, working with your hands or, communicating with people directly. So that comes into play. And then with manufacturing, there's a desperate need, and I mean a desperate need. And so when you're just generically competing with somebody for a job, if it's a saturated market, you could be the best of the best of the best. And if they don't know it, or if there's not an opening, it pretty much won't matter, right? So you have to go into something where there's a need that you also love and enjoy, and wait for it, can make really good money. When I speak to a lot of young people, Jenn, I talk to them and I use the analogy because a lot of the students are high school students that I talk to. And I say, well, if there's a ticket to a game, and if this is around the world, let's say it's a soccer game because that's a worldwide sport, right? And if there's only 40,000 tickets and there's 400,000 people trying to buy those tickets, what's going to happen to the price of the ticket? It's going to go up. Same thing with careers. If there's a desperate need and very few applicants, the salaries are going to go up.
And that's what you're seeing happening in the trades and the manufacturing.
There is, but I will say this. It's for those people that have the skill set. I don't want to disillusion anybody and say you can just show up in manufacturing with no skills. You have to get the skills, and you have to be dedicated and show that you're vested with your employer, that you're ready and eager to gain those skills. Many times in manufacturing, and it's true of other trades as well, they'll pay for that education while you're working. You may have to go to night class, you may have to do different things, and sometimes it's 3 days at work or 4 days at work and 1 day at class, and sometimes it's in the evening during the week. But many times they'll pay for that in addition for you being a paid employee. So there's a lot of different ways to look at it and to get the skill, but as you gain the skill, absolutely, you'll be well compensated, no question.
And what are some of the attributes that would help somebody to be more successful in that kind of work?
Well, there's some skills that in the future generations and the new generations that are somewhat lacking. So I'll break these into two facets. A lot of the soft skills and a lot of the communication skills and the work ethic component in some young people is lacking and underemphasized. So I'll start by saying you need to be at work early and at the very least on time, and you need to show interest and stay, even if it's just a little bit late, because that shows that you're vested and that you're really truly interested in getting better at your craft. Young people today, many times they're more comfortable with texting than they are communicating. And, you need to be able to, demonstrate and communicate either what you know or what you believe in to be effective for yourself. So if you're not doing that, you're hurting yourself. But then in terms of the skills, they're actually the skills of either in manufacturing, it could be repairing and mechanical skills, repairing equipment. It could be programming equipment. It could be process related. It could be quality and an inspection skills. So, when you segue that into electricians and plumbers and carpenters, well, they all have mechanical skills as well. But the initial component being the soft skills, that's universal across all different facets.
Right. So those would be some of the things to think about and to work on if you were suddenly inspired to go into a job in one of these areas. Yes. And that would, I always talk about soft skills. My book is about that. And I talk about yourself, self-improvement being a lifelong endeavor, and that it's really important to show up and to be your best self in the workplace, no matter what your workplace is, because it resonates, it reflects on you, and it will help you to get promotions and get thought of better, et cetera, all the way through. So I fully agree with that. What would you say to somebody who's poking around trying to figure out what to do next? Maybe they need a job for the first time. Maybe they're bored. Maybe they're fresh out of college and can't get a job in the industry they're in, so they're looking at other things. Where would you tell someone to start?
Well, I think the very first thing to start, Jen, is to assess yourself. Understand what you're good at. One of the things that you talked about before this call is that you have to love your work. Well, it's easy to love your work when you're good at it, and if you take the time to know yourself and know what you're good at, then you'll rise to the top, so to speak, and you'll enjoy doing it. When I played ball, I always enjoyed playing ball in a sport that I was good at, right? And I wasn't necessarily interested in the sports that I wasn't good at. So I think, first of all, assessing yourself and knowing, what you are good at, and then where your interests lie, before you go into something that you find out maybe was a bad match. And you really can't blame anybody other than yourself if you go into something or agree to go into something, because you might be influenced by someone else, right? By agreeing to go into something that maybe isn't a good fit for you. So, and then after you assess what that is, then you need to understand what the market is. If I want to be, when I was a kid, I wanted to be a photographer, a sports photographer. And while that's great and everything, and I enjoyed it very much, this is back when Sports Illustrated photographers, all they did was take pictures of games and athletics, not, bathing suit, Sports Illustrated issues. And I thought to myself, well, how many photographers are there going to be, and how big a market is that, and how much money can you make? And so you have to figure out what the market will bear in terms of a salary, and at what level that you enter in and ultimately become. And is that adequate to satisfy what you're interested in and what your goals are? And if not, in my case, I was like, you know what, that's a great thing to enjoy, but I'm not sure the market's that big, and I'm not sure the pay is that as good as I think what I want. And then I looked and I said to myself, I'm good in math and science. Maybe I should look at, in this case, it was the family business, which was manufacturing. And instead of pushing it away, which I was very quick as a young person to do, okay, I reassessed and I said, you know what, I better look at that a second time.
And that's what you did.
That was 40 years ago.
So what do you say to your own kids? They may not be at that stage yet, but what do you say to your own family members about what they want to do?
Well, my 3 adult children are out in their careers, and in every case having families. And 2 of the 3 came into the business, and I told them, I said, look, if this is what you want, that's great. If it isn't, that's fine too. And ultimately, just because of the timing and whatever the case may be, one found his way into the finance world, and the other one found her way into the marketing world. And then the third and youngest found their way into private equity. And my advice was, as your advice is as well, is love what you do. And, to get really good at something, you have to love doing it, to be able to spend as many hours as you have to do it to become the best that you can be, or the best in the industry. And so if you don't love it and you're spending countless hours to try to, achieve the top echelon of your industry, and if you don't love it, boy, that's not a winning combination.
No, and I tell people who work full time that you're actually spending more of your waking hours with the people that you work with and in the activity that you have chosen than you do in your downtime, because you're sleeping at home, presumably, some of the time.
Some more than others, some less than others.
So it's really important to have that work satisfaction, and to have feel like you're doing something productive and helpful. Yeah.
And just as a segue to that comment, that's one thing that I always felt that when I got into manufacturing also gave me that, which was satisfaction that I was accomplishing something, that I was making something, or I was helping my customers do the same. And that's a good feeling.
And it's funny because there are some careers that, I mean, there's advantages to all different careers, but I know for myself, my work is never done. And at the end of the day, whenever that is, it's not the end of the day. Like, I can't just leave everything and oh, good, I did that. I've accomplished that, because it's the kind of job where the phone's always on, the email's always on. I can turn it off and not look at it, but people in my main work that I do, I'm a clergy member. So, people get sick, people end up in the hospital, people, things happen in people's lives. And it's a 24-hour a day job. Whereas when I used to work in healthcare, I would, start at 8 and finish at 4, or start at 7 and finish at 3. And I could walk away knowing I didn't have to think about it again until the next day, because somebody else was doing the evening shift and somebody else was doing the night shift. And I didn't take it home, and I wasn't emailed about it, and I wasn't phoned about it. And I did feel a sense of having accomplished something. And so I've always thought that watching people build something beautiful, turn something awful into something beautiful, or create something, I thought that must be so satisfying. And at the end of the day, you can say, look at what I did. So I can see both sides of it, and how there are many, many advantages to having that kind of career.
No, your point's well taken. And being a clergy member, oh my gosh, that is quite the stressful and very important career, to say the least. But the other facet that I'll point out also is, all around the country, there's two different facets. There's small businesses and independent businesses, and also large corporate America. And that's a whole nother facet that, my children had to, muddle through. Which do they prefer? Do they prefer a small business? And there's no right or wrong. I mean, nothing's better or worse. Is it a better match for you? Or big corporate America? And they both have their advantages. So that's something that your listeners also might consider, is decide, which is the best fit for you. Some people are meant to be their own boss and to be a small business person. I'm not going to say at the same level as a clergy member, because it's not. But with the small business, the phone is always on, and you never get finished with what you have. There's always something to do. But in large corporate America, you're part of a big machine, and you're one cog in that big machine. So you have more of a definitive role and an on and off button. So, but there's advantages and disadvantages to that. So that's another facet for your listeners to consider in what's a good fit for them.
Yeah, it's all that whole exercise in what do I want and what do I not want.
I do a lot of internships and talk to a lot of young people that are going through internships. And if they come into my company or other companies and they say, boy, I really didn't like that, I'm like, that's good. And they go, what do you mean it's good? I'm like, it's just as valuable knowing what you don't want, because that will get you that much closer to what you do want. In our case, or in my case with manufacturing, I tell people, I go, look, if manufacturing is not for you, that is perfectly fine. What's not okay or not fine is that you don't even know it exists. So if 10 people are in a room and only 2 people even know about it, and at the end of the conversation, 5 people say, this is for me, it's a big win, even if 5 people said, no, it's not for us. It's just that in manufacturing and in trades of all different types, there's not a very good us being advocates for our own industries and our own professions. And so our culture has a tendency to not educate the market or educate the workforce or the potential workforce about what the jobs are, how to get a reasonable education. And when I say reasonable, at a reasonable cost, that you can really do very well in terms of pay and salary and what you do.
And debt load, because if they're paying for you to go to school, you're not racking up those student loans.
Well, and that's really one of the things that drives me so much to try. I'm trying to help young people, and I'm trying to help the industry as a whole. But at the end of the day, when you look at the student debt crisis all around the world, it's unfair for people not to understand or know that your return on your education is what I call it, in terms of cost versus what you can gain in salary. That if it's a good fit for you in manufacturing or in the trades, your return on the money invested is way better if it's a good fit for you.
And I wonder if that's changing, if the education piece, as far as letting people know that it's available and that it's out there, is that changing? Is that getting better, or is it getting harder in your estimation?
Oh boy, that is an excellent question. I would say it's slowly getting better. I think most of what we're talking about is a cultural unawareness. And with culture in any community, in any country throughout the world, changing a culture and a perception is very difficult and takes way longer than you would think it should. So I think it is changing, but I don't think it's changing. The marketplace and the workplace and the economic situation change very fast. Education all around the world in any country is more slow to change, and cultures are very slow to change.
So it's an ongoing process.
It's an ongoing battle, and we have to fight it, so to speak, the challenge, one day at a time, and one student or one family at a time. And so what I try to do is I try to make a difference. And the hope that I see and the promising indications that I see is that the financial task and the financial challenge to get an education, to get a skill so that you're employable and you can make a good standard of living and good career is becoming more of a challenge in the student debt. And as that is more challenged, people are reaching out and really looking for answers more than they ever have. And so for that reason, I think ultimately there's hope, and it will start changing at a more rapid pace.
And another thing that I think is important is to educate people. And I mean, I get this, and I hope other people get it, that it's not just for men, right? Manufacturing and trades. I mean, there are lots and lots of women going into it now too, and it's often not something that is suggested or presented to young women.
That's an awesome point. I think I've studied the numbers upwards and inside out and upside down, and they say that the female gender, that there's somewhere around 25 to 27% in manufacturing. That's what I can speak most knowledgeably about. But I would think that it's closer to 12 to 17% at best. So once again, we'll go back to that situation of supply and demand. I think that the female gender has a great opportunity, once again, if it matches their interest and their skill set and what they enjoy. And that's first and foremost. But the fact is that women have a different way of looking, different skill set. In many ways, their attention to detail, and their dexterity is far better than many of us men. And I totally acknowledge that. And so there's quality positions in terms of quality control that they're, at least as well, if not better suited for. Assembly positions that, that they're also better suited for, or at least as well suited for. And but then, if you see a woman on the floor, programming a machine, they should be, and they are welcomed with open arms, because there's just so few, of the female gender in our industry.
I noticed that in some of the co-op programs in the schools, the high schools have programs, the colleges here have programs for work experience. We have in high school what's called work experience, and people can spend time for credit in industries during their high school years and come out. There's actually some of the programs actually give a first year apprenticeship status by the end. I think it probably takes high school years, the last 2 years, but you can come out with at least the beginnings of a trade, and usually by then you're into the program with the organization, and you keep going, and maybe 3 more years and you've got your ticket. So there are programs that are working towards that. And I have noticed, I go to some job fair. Well, before COVID, I went to some job fairs and took part in some of these things, and would notice some of the emphasis on encouraging people to think outside of the traditional career paths, to things that were more diverse and more, it just opens up the whole world, right? If you are interested and have a draw towards that kind of work, then why not? So I hope it's changing. My hope is that it's changing and that it's opening up for more people.
I think it is. I think there's 2 things that I'll point out. Here in the U.S., in the Chicago area where I'm from, they actually have, at a couple different high schools, intro to engineering for females only, for girls only. And the reason they do that is they found that the retention, when the young boys or the young men, when they kiddingly, in jest, I assume, say something about, the girls being in their class, engineering, that the retention in a female-only class is much greater. So by having a female-only class, intro to engineering, that these women will stay in engineering for longer periods of time and ultimately go into the engineering craft. The other thing that in some of the high schools that I speak at, is that I find there's a lot more questions after I speak to the group from the girls than there are the boys. In fact, out of 10 questions, I would say 6 to 7, easy, if not more, are coming from young women. And I think that's a product of, the women at a young age are more mature than the young men. I think, at least that's my belief. And so they end up asking questions. But I also think it's also indicative of changes that are coming, that I think you'll find more women taking either engineering positions, manufacturing positions, or skilled trades positions more than they have in the past.
That's good. Terry, where can people find you if they want to know more or find out about your book? Where can they look you up?
Well, the name of the book is called Finding America's Greatest Champion. And the word champion is a play on words to my organization, which is called Champion Now. And champion stands for change how either American or advanced manufacturing is perceived in our nation. And so it's an acronym. But the organization is a 501c3, and its website is championnow.org. So I've become an advocate for manufacturing careers, but also skilled trades careers. And so the website has, it's terry@championnow.org is my email address. But the website has much information about manufacturing careers. The book, you can find the book there as well, and as well as the book is also on Amazon in addition to that.
Great. And do you have one last piece of advice for the Careers by Jenn listener today?
Well, I think you and I spoke earlier about loving your work, advancing your career, and get the job. And so in loving your work, I think what I would say to your listeners is make sure you assess your skill set and what you enjoy to get to that, to know what, to love your work. Because if you don't assess yourself very well and you think that you'll love the job that you're doing or do love the job that you're doing, if you haven't really assessed what you're good at and what you love to do, maybe you should. As far as advancing your career, the 3 things I say in my book to all young people is to arrive early, stay late, and tell the truth. And I think your listeners, I think that's good advice. And I think if you do that, I think you will advance your work. I think any boss or any employer that sees someone arriving early and staying late, and absolutely if they're, make a habit of telling the truth, that's a person that anybody's going to want, on their team. And as far as getting the job, I'll go back to what we spoke earlier about communication. I interviewed some young ladies at a high school that were really good in engineering. And what I saw is that there was 3 or 4 young ladies of the 10 that weren't communicating. And so I said, are you, in this case, are each of you shy by nature? And they said, yes. I said, well, you can't give yourself a pass. And I said, in this particular case, I would never know. You could be the 4 most talented of these 10 people. But unless you can convey and tell me and show me how talented you are, you won't get that job. So those of you that are a little bit more shy and a little bit more introverted, don't give yourself that pass, because you know what? You may not get that job. So my advice to them would be, you need to push yourself, and you need to, role play in those type of scenarios and come out of your shell and act maybe what might be unnatural for you, because guess what? You need to get that job.
Terry, thanks so much for spending the time with us today. It's been great having this conversation.
Thank you so much. It's been an honor and a pleasure to be on your show.
You've been listening to Careers by Jenn with Jenn Swanson. If you like what you heard, please share this. If every single person listening today shared this episode with just one friend, our audience would be twice as big, just like that. And the more people we can help with our content, the better. So help out a friend and help grow our audience by sharing this show with someone you know who would benefit from the content. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do that, and together we can make a difference. Until next time, take good care.